So today I feel like I'm giving you if Elizabeth Bennet helped more with chores. You know what I'm saying? But more importantly, today we're going to be talking about all the audiobooks I listened to this year. Like most good choices that are made in my life, the choice to start listening to audiobooks was deeply influenced by the one and only Emma Tobias and her relentless promotion of audiobooks as the superior format. And you know what? She wasn't wrong. I only started listening to books at like the end of August of this year. So these are all books I've read in the last August, September, October, November, December, 5 months. Okay, I'm a gay who can't do math. Just roll with me on this. This wrap up is particularly white because I felt like audiobooks were a great way to consume books that I didn't necessarily want to spend a lot of time physically reading, especially a lot of kinds of like classics. I'll start with the one I've already talked about in a wrap up I did for all the books I read in August, and that was The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings series. So far I've made it through The Hobbit, The Fellowship of the Ring, and I have about 8 hours left of The Fellowship. Wait, what's the second one? The Two Towers. As I said with The Hobbit, loved it so much. It was so cozy and perfect. So good. And I'm listening to the narrations done by Rob Inglis, who's like, it's like the perfect depth of voice of just like an old white British man. You know what I'm saying? It's kind of like the perfect narration moment for these books, in my opinion. Especially because he's able to do a lot of the like deeper voices associated with like Gandalf and like the Ents and that kind of thing. And since they're so, you know, few and far between women characters, like it's fine. From The Fellowship in particular, I was very pleased that Boromir is, you know, still a himbo in the text. You know what I'm saying? Aragorn is just as sexy. You know, it is what it is. In terms of The Fellowship, so far I very much enjoyed reading about the Ents, specifically Treebeard, and I very much just checked out during the Battle of Helm's Deep because like, you know what I'm saying? If I want to experience like an epic battle scene, I'll just watch the movie. Again, when I was talking about The Hobbit in the other video, one of the things that I thought was really interesting about listening to the books was seeing the adaptational, I had a New Zealand accent for a second, choices that were made from the original text to the Peter Jackson movies. And one of the things that I'm so glad that is like deeply embedded in the text that got translated to the movies is Gimli and Legolas's friendship. My god, I live and breathe and die for it, okay? It's so precious. Next, I'll talk about something else that I'm still currently listening to, and that is Le Morte d'Arthur by Thomas Malory. Sir Thomas Malory, excuse. So here's the thing. As you may kind of see throughout this, I have been very much regressing into like my mythology, ancient literature kind of moment that I've been having in the pandemic. That's what we've been doing. It's the fault of Percy Jackson. One of the things I decided I wanted to read again was the Arthurian legends, and I had read a book called The Legends of Arthur, The Arthur Stories or something by Rosemary Sutcliffe, which is like this random book I found as a child. But I remember really enjoying it and that I actually understood it because it was written in like a modern English sense while keeping the integrity of the story, obviously, in terms of her translation. But I felt like I didn't want to read that book again for some reason, also because it was a collection of stories and I was trying to find like a bigger compilation, like a compendium, like kind of the text on the legends. I started researching because I thought that like Le Morte d'Arthur was like it. I thought it was like the text, and it's not, because it's the Arthurian legends. There's no like straight up like compilation because it's a series of legends from hundreds and hundreds of years, so it's just like all over the place, and that really stresses me out. But I was like, fine, let's just go to this version because it's like it is one of the central texts of the canon. So did that, and wow, my goodness, is this so truly wild because of content and also because it's in Middle English and I don't know what's going on. The way this book starts, so wild in terms of like the bed trick of how Arthur comes to be, you know what I'm saying? Because these legends were like compiled and written down over hundreds of years, there's there's overlapping and often conflicting different moralities, specifically in terms of Christianity, which is very interesting, especially when it comes to like sex. There is a moment in the story where I think one of the knight's dick got cut off, but I'm not totally sure. There's so much going on. And because this is narrated by Bill Homewood, who has a very deep voice, it very much feels like Mufasa is reading to me in Middle English. So it's a wild ride, to say the least. I also ventured a little bit into the writing of Virginia Woolf. So, you know, contrary to what one might believe, given the name of this channel, I actually have not read that much of Virginia Woolf's writing. I've only, like, previous to this, I'd only ever read A Room of One's Own. And that is because I actually do not super enjoy and cannot really handle her writing. Okay, the name of my channel was more just out of a desire for like a cheeky kind of literary inspired name that wasn't connected to my own name, that had the connotations of like feminist queer reading, you know what I'm saying? So here's the thing. It's because I have personally have a very hard time with stream of consciousness, like modernist / postmodernist writing. Okay, like I talked about this with Wise for Gas of Sea. I just really cannot handle that writing style and I do not enjoy it. I've tried to get into her work before, have not been successful. But then when I was at a thrift shop, I saw a really nice copy of To the Lighthouse and I was like, you know what? Let's give it one more go. Started reading the physical copy and just couldn't do it. Could not do it. So I was like, you know what? We're in an audiobook moment right now. Let's try it. Let's make a switch, see what happens. And wow, so much better. I am really glad I had the physical book for context because this story is so internal. Like I don't think I've ever read a book that had so much inner dialogue and so little external dialogue. But once I let go of trying to understand and keep up with every small thing that was happening and just kind of accepted that I would get a little bit lost in the inner monologue, it was much more enjoyable, especially because it's about this like group of people that are at this family's like summer home. And so you get like, you switch between all the inner narratives of these different people. I was reading about like a dinner party in kind of like a Clue fashion. Then it became like fun and I actually started to get really into it and enjoyed it. And it was narrated by Juliet Stevenson, who was just perfection. Because I ended up being able to enjoy To the Lighthouse, I was like, okay, we'll do one more Virginia Woolf and then we're done with her writing. So I decided to go for Orlando because that was the one that was like gay. On script, they only had the abridged version of Orlando. So I turned to YouTube and I was able to find like the full narration of Orlando, which was done by Corey Samuel. I very much had to read the SparkNote summary of every section after I listened to it because once again just got very lost in the sauce of what was going on in this book. And it is so wild as a story. I didn't realize how satirical this book was in tone going into it, and although it is described as like this like literary love letter to Vita Sackville West, who was like her lover when she was writing this book. And having read, you know, the Wikipedia page for Vita Sackville West, I was like, damn, she really, this is like a direct, like this is so much about her life. As much as it is like a love letter to her and like their relationship, it is also very much a read. Like Virginia Woolf is like roasting this woman in this book, like specifically for like her aristocratic tendencies. It was a lot spicier than I thought it was gonna be. Also a little bit sexy. Okay, hi, hello. This is also very much like, it's described as basically being written for the audience of the like the Bloomsbury group in mind, because it is so much a book about writing and about literature and literary history. There are some things about the character of Orlando that were just so much and I enjoyed so deeply. They are like slight spoilers, so just beware for the next like 30 to 60 seconds. Firstly, the fact that Orlando was still in love with Sasha throughout the entire book, essentially. That lasts like hundreds and hundreds of years is so wild. The fact that Orlando moves to Istanbul from England, because at one point she's like attracted to a character and just needs to escape that. Like, what? There is some stuff going on about race in this book because yes, there is a lot going on here in terms of like gender and sexuality, which makes it a really interesting text, and in kind of like the history of like queer literature. But it's also deeply embedded in whiteness because there's so much in this book about snow and its equation to like whiteness and beauty. There's also just like disparaging attitudes about anybody who isn't white throughout the book. Like there's use of the N-word. The way that Turkish people are written about, like when she's living in Istanbul, is kind of interesting, as well as the like traveler Roma people in France that she lives with. And I'm curious too about the fact that, like, again, kind of a spoiler, but her transformation from a man to a woman takes place while she is living with the Roma peoples. And I'm curious, like, what if that just worked out in the plot point, or if there's some underlying subtext there about race and gender norms and the fact that she had just escaped Turkey, right, in terms of like Orientalism and who's considered to be properly masculine. That would take a lot more like research and pulling apart, and I'm not gonna do it, but I just wanted to put it out there. In the Halloween spooky times, I decided to read Deathless Divide by Justina Ireland, which was narrated by both Bonnie Turpin and Jordan Cobb. The reason there's two narrators is because as the sequel to Dread Nation, this book is written in the two perspectives of Jane and Catherine. And honestly, I actually like really enjoyed this. Surprisingly. I thought that this book was way better than the first book. Part of it is I think it may have just been more enjoyable, like, to experience as an audiobook, but also I think the two perspectives really helped the story, because one of the issues I had with the first book, when it's entirely told from the perspective of Jane, is that it gets incredibly repetitive. Like, I honestly think that book could have been minimum 50 pages shorter than it was, especially because of when she's talking about Catherine so much and saying the exact same things every time. Like, we get it, she's pretty. I also really enjoyed the friendship between Jane and Catherine. I thought it was really well done. The major issue that I talked about in terms of Dread Nation was the representation of Indigenous peoples. So in this book, I don't necessarily think it's better, but there is some stuff that's clarified. So for instance, in terms of the character of Redfern, his name as well as his background is clarified finally. This book did deal with like multiple layers of white supremacy in terms of Latinx people, as well as mostly Chinese immigrant populations and Asian immigrant populations, in terms of like, and of course like Black people, in terms of like navigating the different levels and where they were able to establish themselves within a hierarchy of white supremacy. This book is also very diverse, not only in terms of race, but also in terms of sexuality, which carries on from the first book, but it's just even more palpable in the second book, which I loved. I also think that both of those books did a really good job of talking about trauma and emotions, and like in particular in Deathless Divide, I think it was, and I don't mean age appropriate in like a condescending way, but I think in terms of like young adults who've experienced trauma in their lives, like I don't know, like I think that Jane's emotional journey is something that would be really helpful and something that would have helped me had I read it when I was younger. I also listened to Over the Top by Jonathan Van Ness because I was like, this is why one of the things that people do in reading audiobooks is like celebrity memoirs, okay? And I thought it would be like a little bit of like a light palate cleanser, and boy was I wrong. Okay, this book is surprisingly dark and kind of upsetting, which I think was part of the whole thing in terms of Jonathan being like a very positive, bubbly person, and then them being like, hi, hello. It comes within a context of a lot of really intense stuff. One of the things I deeply appreciate is that from the beginning, Jonathan has like a sensitivity kind of warning about some of the generalized topics that might come up. It includes like disordered eating, sexual abuse, addiction, ranging from sex to substances, cancer and death. There's a lot going on. There's one section, I don't want to give too much away because it was such a delightful surprise, but like if you know, you know. There's a section in this book that is akin to The Worst Part of 1984 by George Orwell, but like the reverse, in that it was such a delightful interlude that it basically made up for 1984 and what I had to experience in reading that book. You know what I'm saying? So, so, so good. So there's so many brilliant, funny moments. Lastly, we're going to talk about a little journey I went on with Beowulf. I was interested because earlier this year there was like a feminist translation that came out by Maria Donovan Headley, name on the screen. But I wanted to actually like have and read that book. But because it is from like an auditory tradition, it made sense that it would be something to listen to. So there was an abridged version of SEAMUS HEANEY reading his translation of the book. I listened to that to get an introduction to kind of what is standard, if that makes sense, because I was curious like what some of the differences were and to just kind of be familiar with the story in general. I really enjoyed HEANEY's narration. I think he did a really good job. He had a really great like voice and like accent for it. So that was everything I listened to over the last few months. And please let me know if you have any suggestions or recommendations of audiobooks that you like particularly enjoyed. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you soon. Bye!